Colleen is with Team for Livable Vancouver, and her running mate in this is Theodore Abbott. Colleen was third place in the 2022 mayoral election after being a city councillor for one term, 2018 to 2022. Elected to city council when Ken Sim was the leader of the NPA. Ken Sim narrowly lost in that election, but Colleen won the seat, and she ran against Ken Sim when Ken Sim created his ABC party in the 2022 election and came in third place. Now, Colleen, if you're elected on April 5th, you will have a chance to hold Ken Sim's feet to the fire until the next election in October 2026. The two big priorities of ABC have really been about the Broadway plan and abolishing the elected park board. Now, they did promise to hire 100 police officers. They say they've exceeded that, but they also promised to hire 100 public health nurses, and they've gone nowhere near that. What are your priorities should you be elected on April 5th?
This by-election is really the thin end of the wedge going into the 2026 election, which is only 18 months out. The reality is that whoever is elected in this by-election will have very little effect. I mean, I hope that there won't be more ABC councillors elected, because they already have a majority, even having lost people. And that would be disastrous for the city. And I think it's important to be able to get on to council in order to shine a light on what's going on. You know, I worked, for example, very hard, Bob, you'll remember, to get an independent auditor general into the hall. Vancouver was the only major Canadian city without one. And that has, to me, been one step towards the kind of responsibility that we have to the public that is not being met at City Hall. So, thin end of the wedge, for me and my running mate, Theodore Abbott, we need two men on the chessboard, as it were. As my experience was, I would bring forward motions and they would be quashed because I didn't have anybody to second them. You may recall that this, with things like I tried to bring forward a motion on False Creek South that I had worked on with the late, great Nathan Adelson and with Larry Beasley, and I couldn't get a seconder. So this is why it's so critical that we get two team councillors on there as real opposition. And when I say real opposition, I mean real opposition, because we are pushing to pause the Broadway plan, for example, because both Christine Boyle with One City and both Adrian Carr and Pete Fry voted in favor of that Broadway plan. And so, in my view, they don't deserve another person on council, because they will not be genuine opposition. They have, if you look at their voting record, and deeds not words, their voting records have been aligned with ABC, particularly on the property development side of things. So we wouldn't be having this by-election, of course, if Christine Boyle hadn't gone and sought her political advancement at the provincial level, running with the NDP. So the $2 million plus bill that the city of Vancouver taxpayers are taking on because of this by-election is really on her, but also on Adrian Carr, who could have chosen to retire before entering the term. But those things aside, we've got 18 months after this by-election to hold Ken Sim's feet to the fire, which I fully intend to do, because I know the guy. I know what he knows and what he doesn't know. And this is one of the challenges we have with politicians in this day and age. They may not know what, in his case, he don't know what he don't know, but convinced of his own superiority because he got elected. And this is a persistent problem, that we keep electing people that really lack foundational knowledge, and then they get in there and can do a lot of damage.
Every step of the way, ABC is trying to find loopholes and try to find ways around accountability at a time when we need more accountability, more transparency in our public institutions in order to keep the faith in those institutions.
Democracy is under siege in the city of Vancouver. And it's not just the city of Vancouver, but our centralized control at City Hall has enabled this. We've seen this more and more. Again, I go back to 2008 and the financial crash. That's when we saw a real profound change at City Hall, not just with the election of Gregor Robertson and Vision, but you'll recall that they fired Judy Rogers, the long-term city manager, who'd been there for 25 years and served under 5 mayors and councils and actually knew what public service was about. And then brought in Penny Ballum, who had her marching orders, which really did transform the city's business and financial plan and has allowed this kind of centralized control through both the city manager's office and increasingly through the mayor's office. I personally believe that if this model persists, the assault on democracy will just get worse. The private sector is essentially taking over the public sector in its objective, in its profit motive. The sad thing is that our legacy in Vancouver of community planning has suffered as it doesn't exist anymore. We're basically saying the city's a blank canvas. We can steamroll all the neighborhoods and now impose this sort of top-down deterministic approach to planning. And all of you residents can get out of the way except for when we want your property taxes and new revenue streams. But I'll talk a little bit more about the governance side, and I wish, that people would take civics in high school so they at least understood what one level of government does from the other. And I'm not convinced the folks at City Hall know that, to be honest. But the Auditor General was an important part of the solution because it provided independent oversight over staff, because the organization, as it likes to refer to itself, is self-perpetuating. It has grown. It's been massive empire building at City Hall over the last 15 years, as you know, Bob. But the other missing pieces in accountability have got to be strengthening the integrity commissioner, but also the lobby. We talked about having a lobbyist registry. Remember that? Because my observation is that that industry, which is the real estate and housing production industry, is effectively running City Hall. Ever since the city hitched its wagon to the development industry back in 2009, when it regularized CACs as a revenue stream in the capital budget, what this has meant is that the city's success is tied to how many rezoning applications it can get approved so it can generate more revenue. So the success metrics of staff have changed from community planning in balance. We all know that we need to add additional housing into the future, but it needed to be supported with infrastructure, whether that was roads or community amenities like community centers and schools. But that has all been abandoned now because what we see is a feeding frenzy of rezoning, particularly through the Broadway plan area, because it's all about the revenue. And the residents can get out of the way. And all those people living in affordable rental walk-up apartment buildings, there's 140 of them that are slated for demolition and replacement by high-rise shoeboxes or dog crates, as they like to call them. And it's all about the land inflation and the value that comes from that rezoning, both for the owners of the land, but also for the city, because they take a piece of the action. And I don't think people realize that this business model is really in large part behind where we are today as an unaffordable city. So I mention these things because the city is in desperate need of course correction. It's not going to happen in this by-election. It's just not possible. But at least if I can get in there together with my colleague Theodore Abbott, we can start to shine a light on it and so that people understand what's broken. We need solutions. We need an antidote to where we are today. But it's not going to come by doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome, which is what the current ABC Council is doing in its policies towards promoting development.
Now, on the theme of watchdogs and accountability, after the 2022 election, Team for Livable Vancouver took a deep dive into Elections BC returns, the returns from the 2022 election, and found a lot of irregularities with ABC, especially with Ken Sims' fundraising, how Ken Sims' family members were making donations to his campaign. And that's still an open book. Elections BC is still taking its time with those files.
What Team did after the election, when we looked at the books through Elections BC on ABC, and it was the secretary of our board that actually went through and did the initial review and identified $116,000 worth of questionable donations. We then sent this back to Elections BC, and they did rule that these were irregularities and they had to be repaid. But there were no consequences. And we have also, our financial agent did a deeper dive and said that he thought it was more, around over 500,000. And what happens is, you'll, if you want to invest, donate $100,000, and you can only, the way that the system works is you can only do it 1,000 each. You do the math, you get 100, I can get 100 people that I'll give. So if I have a staff or family or ways that I can put that money out into, I can split it up, then I can use that as a system to get more money into the donor pool. And that's what we've seen. We've seen right down to 18-month-old toddlers that have written, $1,250 checks, for example. So that kind of shenanigans is going on because they can, and there's no consequences. I find it interesting, though, that they did penalize Mark Marison, as you'll recall, Bob. And I know there was also with Kennedy Stewart's Progress Together, I think it was called, a group, they delisted themselves as a civic organization and switched into a nonprofit society. And I think because of some of the financial issues that they've been dealing with, not suggesting impropriety, but issues. But nothing's happened to ABC. It's like, how can you do this? We have these rules, and you found that they took in 116,000 that they ought not to have done, but there's no consequences. It's kind of the same thing I found with the integrity commissioner. It's like, okay, Colleen, we find in your favor, but there's no consequences.
For the 2026 World Cup being held mostly in the United States, but also in Mexico and Canada. Vancouver and Toronto are two Canadian host cities. Vancouver's scheduled 7 matches for June and July of next year. It is being planned under a cloak of secrecy by an office at City Hall under Jessie Adcock. She is the head of the host committee secretariat. And every time I asked for an interview, I've been told no.
Yeah.
Now, soccer is very popular. A lot of voters are also soccer fans, soccer players, coaches, kids playing soccer. FIFA is not very popular for obvious reasons. It's got a history of corruption. Now, should Vancouver continue on with this project? If you become a city councillor on April 5th in the by-election, will you push to have transparency be mandated? Or should Vancouver withdraw from this project because we're in the middle of this trade war with Donald Trump? Most of the matches are in the United States. Why are we supporting something which is essentially an American program and putting Canadian and Vancouver taxpayer dollars at risk in this event, especially when there aren't enough hotel rooms in Vancouver in June and July?
I will always push for transparency, Bob. That's existential to me. We still have not seen the books from the 2010 Olympics, right? Aren't we expecting to see them in October of 2025? Isn't that correct? Mm-hmm. So that was one of my points back when we were looking at having the Olympics again. Shouldn't we know how we fared the last time before we go jumping into this again? I think all the way back to 1986 and Expo and what the impact of that World's Fair was on the city of Vancouver. Some benefited, sure, some profited from it, but a lot of people were displaced from it. On, the more vulnerable people certainly were negatively affected by it. And so I know there's always this notion that we need to put on big, world-class events to attract the world to Vancouver, but we should be in a position to do a cost-benefit analysis about that. But we're not. These decisions are being made behind closed doors. Back in, the lead up to the 2010 Olympics, we had a plebiscite where the public said, yes, this is what we want to do, and we moved forward with it. But, I tried to push for a plebiscite if we were going to do it again, and just got slammed with a bunch of nonsense that missed the point entirely, which is we should be looking at a cost-benefit analysis in these large-scale events and see, are they really benefiting the economy, and who's hurt? It needs to be viewed in balance. So I can't comment on FIFA and being a soccer fan and all of that's tied to that. I know that there's a lot of enthusiasm. If I'm elected to council, when I'm elected to council in this by-election, I won't be able to do anything about it one way or the other because there'll be an opposition. But I can shine a light on it. And that's where the transparency discussion comes in. We need to know what's really going on because we need to make informed decisions. And you got to know that those that stand to profit, it's always a follow the money exercise. Those that stand the profit are the ones that are going to pursue it. We just have to make sure that the people we represent are not hurt as a result of it.
So thanks again for joining me on theBreaker.news podcast. Colleen Hardwick, one of the two candidates for Team for Livable Vancouver. The other is Theodore Abbott, running in the April 5th City of Vancouver by-election.